On the northern coast of Ireland lives the legend of the Giant's Causeway. It tells of a giant who, answering a challenge from across the sea, was determined to traverse it. But seeing no passage, he built a crossing where none existed. It's in this place another legendary trail was forged. Bushmills, the first licensed whiskey distillery in the world. A reminder to all that when there is no path, you make your own.
Get closer to your cooking with Neff Slide and Hide, proud sponsor of How to Cook Well with Rory O'Connell.
I love cooking and I love teaching people how to cook. Good food is so important, not just for our health, but for our temperament, and it doesn't need to be complicated. For this series, I've created a set of menus which I hope you will try, either as individual dishes or as a complete and balanced meal. We're so lucky to have some of the best raw ingredients in the world. Let's make the most of them. Food is as susceptible to fashion as anything else, which is slightly crazy, really. Beetroot or cauliflower, or for that matter sourdough bread, are of course exactly the same, whether they are in or out of fashion. And although it's hard not to be influenced by fashion, you should cook what you like. In my case, I love beetroot now, always have, and this shaved beet and radish salad is a good example of how versatile this vegetable can be. Sometimes when I'm using beetroot, I wonder have we reached peak beetroot? But whether you think that or not, it's a really fantastic vegetable. So if you're cooking it, you might boil it or roast it. But in this salad I'm doing today, I'm actually going to serve it raw, and I think it's delicious. When you're serving it raw, it either needs to be very thinly grated or, in my case, sliced. Now, I'm going to combine it with some horseradish and also some radish, but I'm going to make perhaps a slightly unusual sounding vinaigrette. Olive oil, you'd expect. So whenever I'm making a vinaigrette or a dressing, I always measure the oil and vinegar. And 2 more to give me 6, and then I measure the other ingredients. So then, lemon juice, so far so unexpected, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And then, what might definitely be unexpected is some elderflower cordial. And the combination of the elderflower, the beetroot, the somewhat hot radish is absolutely fantastic. So a pinch of salt and some pepper, and then a good whisk. This vinaigrette will keep for weeks, I mean literally weeks, in your fridge. There's nothing in here that will deteriorate too much. But like most things, not everything, but most things, the sooner it's eaten, really, honestly, the better. So whisk to emulsify. Great. Now, the other ingredients, the beetroot. So I'm going to shave the beetroot thinly. So I'll cut a little bit off the bottom there just to make it easy. You can use your knife for this, or I'm going to use my mandolin, my much loved mandolin. And I want very, very thin slices. So let's just see how we get on. Oh yeah, they're lovely. So these sort of slightly thinner ones, where you can see the light coming through them like that, that's the sort of level of thickness that I want there. Then some radish. Same thing, basically here, slicing these in. So these guys absolutely love each other from the point of view of flavour. The earthy flavour of the beetroot, and then the peppery and somewhat earthy flavour of the radish. We're nearly there. So I mustn't forget to dress it with the all-important dressing. So there we are, just like that. And even though I put salt and pepper in my vinaigrette, I also want to season up the beetroot and the radish nicely. So they will be glazed like that. Now they stick together, you see that? So you have to work them just a little bit to get the dressing to go through. Then onto a plate. You don't have to arrange them individually. Okay. Like that. Lovely. Then another ingredient I'm going to add on is the horseradish. So just peel the root a little bit, and then I like to use a microplane to grate horseradish. So grate A little of that over. Not too much. It's fiery stuff. And as you can see, even though the plate is sort of fairly well covered there, there's not a lot of ingredient on that plate, so it would be easy at this point perhaps to put on too much horseradish. And then a little bit of mint. And the mint, again, it's, really surprisingly delicious with this. So it's fairly unusual ingredients. The fiery horseradish, the floral elderflower, the fairly timid but nonetheless aromatic mint. I think we need another little bit of dressing, so I'm going to go into my bowl here. Just to go on there like that. So that could be literally just like that. But I want to do one other thing. So this is smoked eel from Lough Neagh in Northern Ireland. It's really, really beautiful quality. And believe it or not, it pairs perfectly with these ingredients. So to expand the theme here as such from a simple but beautiful, sophisticated vegetarian dish, I'm going to pop on some of this beautiful smoked eel. So 3 little pieces like that. And I'm tempted again to put just a little more vinaigrette in to make the whole thing too oily on like that. And that's all you need. A little bit of bread and butter or some grilled bread. Really simple, really quick. I mean, fabulous things. The roasting technique is such a great way to cook a variety of fish. And by following a few simple rules, it's virtually foolproof. I'm going to serve the roast salmon with a preserved lemon dressing. And a homemade jar of preserved lemons is something you should really consider keeping in your store cupboards. I find endless uses for the salty lemons, and whenever a deep hit of bitter citrus is required, I reach for the jar, which will keep happily in the fridge for months. This is a tremendously easy way of roasting fish. And I've got some lovely wild salmon, which is a rare treat for this dish today. So the process for cooking it is completely simple. I have a little bit of parchment paper, this non-stick paper, and then I'm just going to brush it with some olive oil. Just the minimum amount, because salmon is already oily. So I just want to put a little bit of olive oil just to help to get a little bit of colour. So the minimum amount, good quality, extra virgin olive oil. And then I'm just going to brush the surface like that. So, probably not even a teaspoon per fillet of fish. Now, very importantly, some salt and pepper. So the seasoning is going to be good. So that goes into the oven at 220 degrees to roast until it's just cooked through. Great. While the salmon is in the oven, I'm going to make the preserved lemon dressing. And these are what are called preserved lemons. And they're lemons that have been marinated, I suppose is the correct word, in salt and lemon. And this is also central to the very simple dressing. So I'm going to use about half of the lemon here and cut it into little dice. So you don't want the pieces too big, because if you get a piece that's too big with a salmon, all you get really is salt and lemon. Now you can buy these very easily. They're now sort of very easily available in good food shops. But I would encourage you to try and make your own, because honestly, they're very straightforward. Right, okay. Then for the sauce here, which is essentially a dressing, all that lemon goes in, and then some olive oil. So olive oil going in, lovely extra virgin olive oil, the best quality you can get, because it's completely raw in the vinaigrette. A little bit of white wine vinegar. So pop that in. And then maybe surprisingly, but then when you think about it, not so surprisingly, some honey to balance the sourness and the saltiness. Now we don't want to make it too sweet, because this is a savoury dish, but a little bit of honey is just lovely. I mean, this dressing with a piece of roast chicken or grilled chicken would be fantastic also. A tiny pinch of salt, not that we need much because of the saltiness of the lemons, but definitely a little twist of pepper. Like that. So, tiny little taste just to make sure the balance is right. Now, they're too sweet, too sour, or too salty. And I need to get a little bit of the preserved lemon like that when I'm tasting it. Oh, it's delicious. It's really fresh and salty and lemony, all in a good way. So the rest of my ingredients, I've got some lettuce leaves. So this is what's called green oak leaf lettuce. It's very, very tender, and this is going to go around the salmon raw. And as the heat from the salmon sort of melds with it. It sort of softens the leaves out beautifully, but they're really tender and lovely. That green oak leaf, it's really beautiful. And if available, if they're not available, I wouldn't not make this dish, but lovely pea tendrils, which are such a thing of beauty, really. And sometimes if the flowers are attached, they go in as well. And then I've got also some herbs here. I've got a little bit of dill, lovely and feathery, and then a little aniseedy chervil. Now, we're pretty much nearly ready to go. So, nice serving dish. And you can have your lettuce leaves arranged on your dish while the salmon is in the oven. So as you can see here, you've nearly got your vegetables. In fact, you have stroke salad to go with the fish. So the only accompaniment you might need with this would be, if you love eat boiled new potatoes, would be, in my opinion, the sort of perfect thing. Yeah, so, you know, your entire meal practically on a single plate. And then pea tendrils. I'll just pop them in there, almost they're looking as if they're sort of growing out of the lettuce, which you could definitely describe as being fanciful, but there you go. This is a dish that if I had to cook for a lot of people, I would not hesitate in making this dish, because the cooking of the fish is so easily, and when the fish is cooked, which I think it almost is, let's have a little look. Yeah, gorgeous. Just slightly sort of firmed up there, like that. I don't want it over or under, because if you overcook salmon, as you will know, it can get very dry on you. Great.
On the northern coast of Ireland lives the legend of the Giant's Causeway. It tells of a giant who, answering a challenge from across the sea, was determined to traverse it. But seeing no passage, he built a crossing where none existed. It's in this place another legendary trail was forged. Bushmills, the first licensed whiskey distillery in the world. A reminder to all that when there is no path, you make your own.
Right, now you're ready to serve. I mean, this is, in my opinion, easy. So just slide the fish, which should come off your parchment paper really easily, just down onto the leaves. It seems strange to put the hot fish down onto the cold leaves, but that's part of the charm of this particular dish. I like if they are sort of snuggled in there, like they're sitting in a little green bed. Yeah, now I'm beginning to get too lyrical. Enough already, I would say. The dressing, then, give it a good stir to mix up the vinegar and the oil. Then, over the leaves, because we want to dress the leaves. Over the salmon, because we want that lovely salty salmon, or sorry, salty lemon, when we bite into the fish. Then, a few little sprigs of dill, or fennel that could be. And then if you happen to have them, obviously the pea flowers would be lovely. What I have, of all things, are little sort of pak choi flowers. Great, those little flowers. Now, the very last thing, this is twice I think we've had the very last thing, a few little sprigs of this beautiful feathery chervil. So really, you could say this is fast food in a way, in the best sense of the word. It's easy once you get yourself organized and once you have the dressing made, and I think that's a feast. So far in this series, I've made desserts with prunes and gooseberries, and today I'm continuing my quest to reintroduce the less popular fruits with a Medjool date and vanilla tart. I like it best served slightly warm, with the cream just set, but it's still really good the next day served at room temperature. So I'm going to make the pastry for the date tart before I start anything else, because that needs to rest and chill before we roll it. So I've got some plain white flour and butter, and I'm also going to put a tiny pinch of salt into the flour just to lift the flavour somewhat. You could do this stage, which is called the rubbing in of the butter, in a food processor if you want to. Honestly, there's no particular advantage to doing it by hand. So we just start off like this. I want to rub in the butter until it pretty much disappears. That's never any harm, just to lift up the flour like that, just get a bit of air in there. So now we're getting a texture which looks like sand. So we're pretty much there. So once you've rubbed the butter into the flour, so it's pretty much disappeared, as I said, just sprinkle in the sugar and continue on. Now, I'm adding in a little beaten egg, okay? And I'm going to put in less egg than I think I need, because if you put in too much, you know you're in trouble, but obviously I can add in a little bit more. You can use a fork if you want to, but quite soon I'm going to get my hands in here, because then that way I'll know exactly what the texture is. In fact, I'm going to get my hand in right now. Now, see the way it went from sort of gravel to pebble, and now it's sort of coming together into, I'm not going to say a stone, I'm going to say a lump like that. I'm going to put a few little drops of egg on my finger like that, just to get the last few little bits of pastry in. Your bowl should basically come clean. I usually run around the bowl like that, scrape off my fingers, so we're getting everything in there, and that's it. Then, I like to flour the work surface a little, and note that today I didn't use any water. I had it there handy, ready to go, but I didn't use any because my egg was large enough. So put it out on your work surface. Then I like to make it look nice and smooth. So again, not being too cautious with it, and then flatten it out into a round like that, because this will mean the flatter you push it into, the more quickly it's going to chill for you. And that is to your advantage, because this pastry will be so much easier to roll when it's nice and cold. So a little parchment paper, make a little parcel, just so it doesn't get a sort of a skin on it in the fridge. And that goes into the fridge to rest for a minimum of 30 minutes. You could freeze that, by the way. Now, I've got some that I made already, and I chilled for the 30 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and line my flan ring. So a little more flour on your work surface. And then this is the flan ring that I'm using. So what I like to do, as usual, is to draw a little template in the flour to allow for the base of the tart and the risen edge and a tiny bit more. Then my pastry, which I've taken out of the fridge a few minutes ago, so it's softened ever so slightly down on our work surface. Don't be afraid to use a nice bit of flour here. I can always brush off the excess flour as I go on, but flour is your non-stick aid here. Now, when I'm rolling the pastry, I like to keep moving it as I go, so it doesn't get a chance to stick to the bottom or to the base of my worktop, even though I have flour underneath it. And I roll to the edge, but never out over. If you roll out over the edge of the pastry, you make the edges of the pastry too thin, and that will become difficult. And then keep loosening it. If necessary, draw in a little more of that flour, reinstate your sort of circle. Now, when you think you're getting close to the required size, just sit your tin down on top again. Yeah, I think we're pretty good. Now, just gently and carefully roll the pastry around your rolling pin. At this stage, I quite like to brush off some of that excess flour. It's of no advantage to me. It's done its job. You could save it, pick it up, put it into your flour container for another day, and then just gather your thoughts just before you drop in the pastry into the tin, like that. And then push the pastry forwards, like that, and right down into the base using your fingertips. So just take a few moments to do that. Now, so I take the pastry, push it forward, and press, like that. So remove the scraps, like that. Now, the next stage that I like to do then is to just press with my finger like that to give me a slightly raised edge. Keep moving all the way around. If I find a place where I think there's too much pastry, I just literally push off a bit like that. Make sure the pastry isn't sticking anywhere to the outside of the tin, because that can cause it to, it'll cook there if it's on the outside of the tin, and make it difficult to get the tart out of the tin later on. Okay, now what we're doing here is we're baking the tart blind, as the expression goes. That's when you cook the tart with no filling in before the filling goes in, to ensure that you'll have a lovely crisp pastry. So I've got some parchment paper, and then I've filled it with just old dried beans, and in this case, rice. And then this, very importantly, we chill before it goes into cook. So we made the pastry and chilled it. We line our flan ring. and chill it with the beans and the parchment in if you want. And that chills as well. And then we're going to bake it. Once the pastry tart case has been chilled in the fridge for half an hour, place it in an oven preheated to 180 degrees. After 20 minutes, I like to take the case out of the oven, remove the beans and the rice, and paint the base of the tart with a little beaten egg to seal it. Then put it back in the oven for about another 10 minutes. So I've got my egg glazed pastry and allowed it to get completely cold. That's important before you put the tart together. So with the dates, the fatter they are, the nicer and more luscious the tart is going to be. So just flick off or pull off just the little piece from the top of the date there. And then I cut them in half around the side like that, because the dates go in half for good reason, because we want to remove, very importantly, the hard stone from the middle of the date. So that's that. So we line the bottom of the tart shell with the dates, cut side up, which may seem a bit strange, but that's the way I prefer to do it. That way, when you're serving the tart afterwards, everybody gets a nice bit of date in the particular slice. Okay, there we go. Now, the custard is absolutely classic. It could not be simpler. Egg yolks to set the custard, cream to add body and texture and consistency, and then a little sugar just to sweeten the tart. The dates, of course, have natural sugar in them, which is delicious, but they need a little bit of extra sugar. This tart isn't overly sweet. I think the balance is perfect. Now, final ingredient into the custard is a little vanilla. You could use vanilla extract if you want to, but more often than not, I just split a vanilla pod in half like that and scrape out the seeds. So scraping the seed out with the blunt side of the knife, and then pop that in and just give it a good whisk. Now, I find it easier at this stage to decant this custard, a sweet classic custard, into a jug before I pour that onto the dates. Now, the other thing I find is really convenient at this stage, be careful when you're pouring in the custard, okay? Not to pour it in too quickly or you'll dislodge all of the dates that, in my case, I've arranged quite carefully. And don't pour all of the custard in. Now, just pour about half of it in. Ooh, see there where they're starting to float? Who knew the dates had a mind of their own? But anyway, they're starting to float, so I'm going to put that into the oven, which I've preheated to 180 degrees. And then when that's in situ, we pour in the rest of the custard. I find that's easier, not so messy moving it around. Now with my jug, and again nice and gently. Okay, that's all of the custard in. Now that's going to cook for 90 minutes, which seems like a long time, an hour and a half. And I find it takes the full hour and a half in my oven. It's going to get quite dark on top. And sometimes you look into the oven and you think, this is getting a little bit too dark. It needs to be really quite dark, because that little layer of flavour that you get from the dark surface of the custard is delicious and adds to the overall experience. So you can see what I mean by the darkness of the colour, but not until I cut into it, which I'm about to do, will that sort of really make sense. So it's just barely set custard. I don't want this set sort of quite like a quiche. That's not what I'm after. Oops. Yeah, so just, could we call it a sort of a nervous custard? Little blob of softly whipped cream. And I hope that changes your mind about dates, because it's changed mine.
Get closer to your cooking with Neff Slide and Hide, proud sponsor of How to Cook Well with Rory O'Connell.